Good morning, everybody. We are live for NFL week number 18 here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. This show, we're going to talk about each and every side and total on the week 18 card. We'll break down each option that you have. We'll go through a ton of situational angles. We'll also go through where the price is, where it should have been, and where it might be going, and try and make sense of everything that is going on in the final week of the week 18 regular season. Final week of the regular season with week 18 mixed in. We're at the end. As you can tell, we're ready for playoffs here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. I've personally been ready for playoffs for a couple of weeks now, but we're getting very, very close. So good to see so many folks back in here. Happy New Year to everybody joining. Hope you had a fantastic holiday weekend as well. We'll get to each and every game in just a second. We'll say some hellos to everybody who's joining back in the stream. Devin Barth back on a Wednesday. Unfortunately, last week of the regular season. I'll be honest. I've kind of been ready for the end of it 2 weeks ago. There was a full preseason workload that I took on this year for the first time in a long time. And this extra week, a guy's getting a little bit old here. You add in week 18, everything was so neat and tidy forever. Growing up and going through the seasons. Now you get the extra week, you got the preseason. It's becoming a lot. So we're ready for the wild card week. A lot to talk about, though, for week 18 as well. Nathan says, hello. Hope you're doing well, too. Jay Karma, final week of the regular season. Good morning. Yes, indeed it is. Hawkeye Hammer, first time listening live. Welcome in, Hawkeye Hammer. Great insight. Thank you for joining live, too. I was saying a good morning to Garrett. Diana Gerard back for another live stream as well. Good stuff about my struggling Seahawks. That was a killer for your Seahawks last week in that spot against the Pittsburgh Steelers. My goodness, did they waste an opportunity there. Garrett Stone, Happy New Year's as well. Let's close the season nicely. I sure hope so. Big Cedar, Paynes Valley, incredible golf trip. My goodness, if you string those two together, that is certainly a fantastic golf trip. Nathan says, did RAS release anything? Not yet, Nathan. It's a bit of a wait and see week with everything that's going on, as we'll get to with all of the games coming on. Happy New Year to Hunter 11, Terry, Jay Nava, who had the white Lululemon at plus 250, says David. Yeah, there we go. That was exactly it. Adam Orphan, Happy New Year. David as well. Nathan, you're 31, but when you're 31 going on 65, it sure feels like it too. Well, saying good morning to Preston, Joe Lupo, and Jason. Well, that's a bit dark, but yeah, fitting it in there as a last second comment. But there we go. Brutal backdoor in the Colts game last week. That was something that you could see coming for about a quarter and a half. And the way that Steichen is running out these games, he calls it the pass to lead and run to win philosophy, which is why the Colts are such an interesting team to bet when you're looking at totals, because if they are trailing, their aggression and pass rate and willingness to push downfield is as extreme as any team in the league. When they're leading, they completely abandon the pass. And it's multiple games now in the last 4 or 5 weeks. The Pittsburgh game comes to mind, the Raiders game, with the combination of Taylor and Sermon, let alone when Moss comes back. Anytime that Steichen has a lead late, he just absolutely deflates the game with the run game. And the O-line for Indy is trending as one of the better units in the league. They were great forever, midway through the season, really struggling, and they're finishing so strong. I mean, you can't stop that run late in games, and they're just wearing down teams. But last week we saw what happens when they get into the red zone. It stalls out a little bit. They're going like 9, 10, 11 straight runs. And what's tricky is if it stalls out and you're needing them to cover, Steichen's not playing the win by margin. He's just playing the win. And once it got up 10, like that defense completely conceded those drives late against the Raiders. They were giving so much space on fourth down. And so if the Colts get in and we see them in the playoffs, I think that strategy is going to be expanded even further. And that's going to make the Colts a really interesting bet, not only full game, but also second half. You're going to be looking at totals that are interesting too, because we're seeing play calling from Steichen that we just haven't really seen from other coaches, the way he's handling it too. So interesting look there as well. Gerard's getting a laugh in on the comment from Jason. Ryan Roberts says, good morning. Zach Moss, speak of the devil, Century and PGA Tour starts this week. How about Cam Smith? Pardon me. Cam Young. I'm mixing up the Cams. That is as significant as an offseason transition as we've seen since Bryson during the COVID years. My goodness, he looks like the lead singer from Creed in some of these photos that are leaking from the practice round. I don't know what happened, but you get the caddy switch and you get a completely different looking human. I didn't think it was him in the leaked photos that hit during the practice round. That was unbelievable to see. So one of the top guys on the tour coming into 2024 with a very different look and perhaps a very different diet in the offseason that I can certainly relate to as well myself, as I'm getting a little bit wider too. All right, let's get to week 18. Going to be a fun PGA season to watch for sure. Want to just remind everybody, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, which is about 45% of you, we're pushing for 8,000 subscribers. We're at 7,837. No reason not to be subscribed if you enjoy the content, if you're getting value from the shows, perhaps if you want to wager from anything that has come through on these YouTube live streams or anywhere else. The subscribe button is down below. If you want to hit that button, you will be subscribed to the channel. You'll get notifications of more videos. We can see it slowly ticking up. There's a lot of you watching on the app that are not yet subscribed. Would really appreciate if you took the second to do so while you're watching the stream. I'll remind you a couple more times during the show, but if you're doing it now and you have the second, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I would also love to know, as we get near to the offseason, as the NFL season winds down, what would you guys like to see from an offseason content possibility? It's not something I've typically done in the past, but certainly an opportunity to do so this season. Would you like things keeping up on the monthly basis? Would you like maybe a couple emails per month with thoughts on trades, win totals, team previews, draft? Let me know in the chat right now if you're watching. You guys are following this and value the content I'm doing. So I'd love to hear from you guys what you would like to see me potentially do in the offseason to keep everybody in tune. And it's not just this 6-month break where I come back in August. So if that's something you've thought about or you have any thoughts, please let me know in the live chat, and I'll definitely consider it as we go in the offseason. Garrett says Steichen learned that in Philly. He definitely did. That is a very real approach from Steichen in a big way too. Same sweater, different color. Must be the one. I've got the same hoodie 6 times and the same sweater 4 times. I wish they made more. So that's something. Moonfish says, would you consider a weekly fantasy PGA pod? So I think golf is probably the most difficult market to bet on. I have never played any type of fantasy sports, so I would not be interested in fantasy PGA. And I will definitely not be interested in betting PGA. I've always got the Golf Channel on. I follow the tour. Massive golf guy myself. Just got the new driver as well that I'm looking forward to taking out one of these afternoons. But it is not something that I bet or look at or have any success doing. I think golf, the way that the market's structured, how people get to go first before prices are posted, how one book controls the market, I know who's controlling that too. I don't want to try to compete with them. It is very, very difficult. So no, I would not consider that, but certainly watching always and have a ton of thoughts as well on golf every single time. Okay, let's get to week 18. So we'll try kind of paint the situation for each game. We'll try give the number and then some thoughts on the matchup. It's a very clunky week in perspective of doing a live stream Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific for games Saturday and Sunday with so many moving parts. And so I just want to kind of give everything that I have for each game. It'll be a lot of indecisiveness, but I hope that you can take it, think about it, and as the week progresses, you can hopefully use it to inform some decisions down the stretch. There's really not a whole lot else that can be done with the week 18 card. And I know it's the second week that there's going to be a lot of waffling on games, but that's just kind of the nature of late season NFL betting. It's just not the same as earlier in the year. We've had some weeks where there's been a ton of conviction, a lot of thoughts, a lot of sides, a lot of totals. This is not going to be one of them. Hopefully next week there's 1 or 2 spots in the wild card round that really stand out that we can take advantage of. But this week is just going to be a lot of talking and going back and forth. So if you have questions, you have comments, the live chat on the right, please help me through this and I'll try and answer anything that you might have specifically on each of these games. So we start off on Saturday with the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. The current price is Pittsburgh minus 3.5. The total in this game is down to 36.5. So before we get into the number, I just want to throw out the weather report that we had internally. which was 85% monsoon in exclamation marks, 18-mile-per-hour winds with gusts up to 28 miles per hour. So there is going to be a weather impact in this game. The biggest one is always going to be the wind, and that appears to be something that will have an impact on this game too. So we're seeing the total continue to drop down. When you think about what these two teams are and you think about the situation, you start to kind of look for reasons why you might be able to bet on the Baltimore Ravens. So if the Ravens in this game elect to sit Lamar Jackson and the rest of the starters, Zay Flowers dealing with a bit of a lingering injury, you have Kyle Hamilton and some other defensive guys dealing with a lingering injury. If those guys elect to sit, you have a Ravens team with Tyler Huntley coming in under center that we have seen in the past when Huntley takes over, willing to work a very run-centric game plan. If this is a game where the weather impact, specifically the wind, is as significant as it is labeled to be on this Wednesday morning, you would think that that is going to restrict what both teams can do passing, which I think probably lends itself relatively well to Ravens finding success running, but then also being able to defend Mason Rudolph and this newfound Steelers pass game a little bit better too. From the Pittsburgh side as well, it's a big step up in class in terms of defensive opponent for what Rudolph has faced the last 2 weeks against Cincinnati and then against Seattle. Now, all of that can be thrown out the window if the Ravens sit a lot of their starters, but it could be a weather assist spot for the Ravens on both sides of the football, really, as the total comes down. Likely play count gets reduced, variance gets shrunk a little bit, with both teams likely having to run the football more. That becomes interesting. Now, if we're just talking about this number at 3.5, I think this is about 85% of the way, if not a little bit higher, to assuming the Ravens sit everybody. Because if they were not sitting starters, this was a game that was played maybe last week, there was full motivation, so to speak, on both sides, you would be looking at the Ravens around the touchdown favorite, arguably slightly higher. So it's a big switch. It's a big premium put on the Steelers. They obviously have to have the win to keep the playoff hopes alive. The Ravens locked into the 1 seed. So in so many of these games, the question that I would have is, how can you look to bet against the team that has the premium applied to them? And in this case, it's obviously a very big premium put on the Steelers. The reason I'm not saying bet the Ravens right now here on a Wednesday morning, getting 3.5 points, is because we still don't have the official announcement. So if you take the Ravens at 3.5 and the starters play, because Harbaugh says, we don't want what happened in 2019 when Lamar got MVP, when they got the 1 seed, everybody sat for 20 some days, they play Tennessee and get boat raced. If Harbaugh says, we don't want that to happen again, we're going to play Lamar, this number is going to go back to the other side of 0. If he comes out today or another day this week and says, we're going to sit everybody needs rest, I think this number pushes out further. And because I think that the latter at this point is the more likely of the scenarios, you kind of have to wait on the Ravens, because I think you're going to probably see 4.5, if not a little bit higher. And in a game where possessions are going to be at a premium, those points are going to become quite valuable. So in so many of these games, it's looking for the team that doesn't have the premium, trying to justify a case for it. I think the Ravens fit that bill, but you're kind of handcuffed here on a Wednesday morning, waiting to see what comes of it. So that's how I would look at Steelers, Ravens, with the weather, with the potential situations brewing around it. The one other note that I would say, which kind of has a little bit of hesitancy for me as well. Before the London game this year that the Ravens played against Tennessee, there was a lot of commentary, The Athletic, other Jeff Zrebiec, who covers the team as well. They had this big thing about how Harbaugh went out of his way in the offseason to hire a team to specifically research and prepare the Ravens for that trip to London, to prevent what happened their last London game when they got embarrassed against the Jags from happening again. And the Ravens are a very smart organization. They put a lot of stock into things like this. And the Ravens approached that week in London completely different than how they did it a couple of seasons ago. And so in the back of my mind, that's kind of lingering too. I wonder if that leads to a different mentality for the Ravens this week, considering how they handled that other week this season so differently, relating back to that 2019 one seed lockup, sitting everybody, then getting beat by Tennessee. Just a lot of stuff going on. But I could only look to the Ravens here. But I think the play here is wait and maybe see a bigger number as we get closer to Saturday and more announcements are made. Kel says this feels like a 16-13 game. Certainly in that range. Could be if we see that rain tick up, if we see the wind tick up, that gets pretty interesting too. Ryan says, with starters sitting in mini games, are unders a stronger look in week 18 historically, or are those things usually priced in? I don't have a specific, here's what the percentage has been for unders in those games where that happens. I did go back and look the last couple of seasons at teams locked into spots that sat their starters. The performance of those teams was actually quite disappointing. And so I thought that was quite interesting. As we're seeing this week, this Steelers-Ravens game, a perfect example, it is very, very difficult to find something around this info that is generally not mostly priced in before the announcement. Very few things catch the week 18 market by surprise. And especially so the other way for the teams that already have the premium. So like, for example, the Steelers with the situation must have the win for the playoff hopes, stuff like that you're going to hear referenced a lot this week is 100% of the time priced in and accounted for. And there's usually extra being accounted for in those spots too. So when you're going kind of the unknown route, will the Ravens sit starters? You're getting most of that. When you're going the known route, Steelers need to have it. That's almost often more so than what it deserves to be priced into the market, which is why I'm saying, how can you look at these games and advocate for the side without the premium is what you're looking at. Moonfish says, ditching my Ravens season perfect attendance record and staying home. That is a terrible attitude and a part-time fan stance that I will not stand for. As a Jets fan that lives and dies with every single game through the good and the bad, the fact that you have it so good with the Ravens and their team and you're skipping a game is unacceptable. We got to be better than that, Moonfish. Nathan says, good opportunity for a middle here. If you take the Ravens now and they announce the starters may begin the game, of course, it's a risk. They elect to sit from the start and it goes against you. That's kind of the debate that we've had internally. I think it's a better weight spot. Certainly, you're right. If they announce it's in, you're going to have a massive middle. But I think they're less likely to go than they are likely, and you're going to get a bigger number the other way when they sit. I still think there's going to be a bump for the Steelers if that announcement is made. So that stands out for sure. Connor and Josh both said same smart front office may realize Buffalo gets in if they win, which is likely incentive to sit guys. This is where week 18 gets fun. Like that's like the next step beyond. I don't know on that one, but an interesting comment that I didn't think of too. But that's maybe, I don't know. It's like how we say things like must win, don't care, don't need to win, throwaway game. Like every week in the regular season, week 1 to 18, every team is always trying to win. They always need to win. It's not often you see just like a complete no-show. We've seen like bad performances because you're getting a bunch of backups. I don't know if the Ravens organization is going to sit there and say, okay, we're calling this one in. Nobody's going to try out of spite to keep Buffalo out. I think that puts players at a bit of risk that's maybe unnecessary. I think it's an interesting thing to talk about and consider. And to me, it's more maybe like late game scenarios where it's a choice on a final drive. You go like a couple extra runs late in games instead of pushing down. Like that's when I think it shows. From a whole game plan perspective, I don't know. But that's a really interesting comment from you guys there for sure. A couple more comments here. Jay Karma says, don't think the Ravens care who they play. Would league rather have... Wow, okay, now the league conspiracy theories are going to pop up here. I'm not going there on the show. Feel free to put them in the chat, though. Couple other comments. You should always take the chance to keep your division rivals out of the playoffs. They're teams you don't want to see. And Ravens... another comment from Connor. Ravens would certainly rather the Steelers in the playoffs than the Bills. To suggest otherwise is silly. I don't know. It's an interesting talking point for sure, though, Connor. Certainly stands out for sure. Okay, next game. Saturday Night Football. Houston Texans on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. Houston, a 1.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 47.5. We talked about the Steichen stuff at the top of the show. What we have seen so far this week has been a pretty significant move to the Houston Texans. This opened Colts as a 2-point favorite. It was Houston money consistently. I think a couple things are playing into this. The first, we obviously saw C.J. Stroud back and healthy last week. We saw Nico Collins back looking like his old self. But more importantly, or as importantly, rather, we saw defensive starters at multiple levels back and healthy as well. Houston had this weird 3-week stretch where they had multiple injuries to the defensive line, to their linebacker group, to their secondary. The secondary injuries are still there. Those guys went on IR. That's going to be a hole for Houston that they're going to have a little bit of difficulty covering in the middle of the field deep the rest of the season, whether it ends here or it goes into the playoffs. But the pass rush is back. The linebacker group is back. And that's significant for Houston because they were getting gashed by opponents for a couple of weeks without those key guys there, Cashman, Anderson, and others on the defensive line and in the middle. So that was a big get back for Houston last week. And then there was kind of this back and forth on how you price Houston because obviously Stroud was hurt. You lost Tank Dell. You lost Nico Collins. You had Dalton Schultz banged up. So the Houston Texans offense really cycled through basically their top 4 starters in terms of QB and receivers. And now everybody but Tank Dell is back and good to go. And so it's a very different Houston team this week than what we've seen the last couple of weeks. And that's drawing some interest in the market because Houston, you think back to like week 9, 10, 11, we're getting bet consistently. Their overs were getting bet consistently because Stroud had this mandate that he wanted to throw more. When you think about the Raiders and what they were able to do against the Colts defense last week, there was a very bad quarterback in Aidan O'Connell who went in, had a lot of success, especially late in the game when the Colts were leading. That's kind of why you're seeing some over money come back into the market. You're also having the Steichen stuff that I mentioned. If you see this as a spot where the Texans are leading, you're going to get that aggressive look from the Colts, and that is going to lead to points. The really only way, like either way, you're getting a serious chase team playing one way or the other if you're having a team that's leading early. Houston with Stroud in those games where they had to play catch up and chase was just ridiculous at how willing they were to push the ball downfield and how much success they were having doing it. And on the other side, you have just one of the biggest chase coaches in the league in Steichen. And so I get the over money. 47's a pretty high premium to put on both of these offenses, considering you have this element where if the Colts are leading, they just deflate the game. And there's probably not a lot that Houston can do to stop that. That worries me a bit. But in a scenario where, I mean, the Colts are having to play catch up, if you believe that Houston money, I think you're going to be looking at some pretty appealing in-play markets on this game. I think 47 pregame is priced pretty fairly. I think the Houston money coming in probably justified as well. But I can't help but think you're getting the better coach with Steichen at home. Definitely not the better quarterback, but maybe a little bit surprised to see some disrespect here for the Colts. But just no opinion from me on the price on this one. But this is one you can sit Saturday night at home with your phone and just kind of play the chase coaches going back and forth with the chase QBs. Because, I mean, if you get an early lead from one of these sides, you're going to get a drastically different game plan from the opposing offense. And they've shown that all season long. If you get a Colts lead, you're looking at Taylor carries in play. You're looking at potentially Sermon carries in play, depending on the Zach Moss news. Like, there's so many angles that you can approach this in play. But pregame, I just don't know if you're getting a lot side or total here. And then again, if you get the Colts leading it too, not only do you get those running backs, but then you get Stroud attempts on the other side, because we know how Houston handles that. Plus, you have the built-in fact that this is for staying alive in the AFC South, staying alive for the playoffs. You get that added desperation. I don't know if we're going to see that price correctly in play from some of the models at books. So I think this is a great sit on the couch Saturday night, watch it happen in real time, get the app out, watch it, and you're going to be able to kind of go back and forth with either team. But pregame, there's just not a lot here that excites me on either side. Preston says, seems like everyone is on the Texans this week, and the line has only moved slightly. Makes me think Indy is the right side. So Chris opened. They opened Colts -2, -115. That quickly got bet to 2 -06. And it's got down as now Houston 1 -15 the other way. So again, it's a move through zero, but still stands out a little bit to be for the move to Houston so far earlier in the week. UPF got Texans at +2, so that was right at the opener. Certainly see that. Jay Karma got Will Anderson plus 2,500 before the Titans game. A lot of value. I think he probably needs another sack probably in this game to secure that, but I think that that's moved significantly based on what I was seeing or hearing. Nathan says, just because we all want to see the Texans in the playoff doesn't mean they're a lock. There's the L word to win this game. Colts dominant on both lines of scrimmage. That O-line for Indy, we talked about it with the Steichen stuff at the start. Significant increase for sure. That is a O-line that has just gotten better and better every single week. And last week against the Raiders, some of those holes were just massive that Taylor was able to find space and run through. So real offensive line advantage in a big way in that one. Sunday games, I'm going to go through rotation order and how the games are listed on the rotation schedule. So the times on these are going to be kind of jumbled up. The timestamps for the video are down below. You can jump game to game. And so if this is not going in the order in terms of how games are listed time-wise, you can either slide it in the app on the timeline to get to the game you want, or in the description of the video down below. Every game is listed with the timestamps where you can tap it and it'll jump you to the video. But these will go in rotation orders. Starts off Dallas Cowboys on the road at the Washington Commanders. Dallas, a 13-point favorite. Total in this game is down to 45.5. The total was as high as 50. Why is the total dropping? 15-mile-per-hour winds sort of lingering around this game, so it's not super significant, but there's also the chance that we see a little bit of rain or snow, and this is not going to be one that is a high probability, but it's around that 35 to 40% mark that we get precipitation. So you have a couple things at play here. A win for the Cowboys gets them the 2 seed in the NFC. It would mean that their only road playoff game here through the Super Bowl would have to be going into San Francisco. So there is incentive for the Cowboys in this game. For the Commanders, you don't know who you're going to get as a starting quarterback. Will it be Sam Howell? Will it be Jacoby Brissett? Last week against San Francisco, we talked about how significant either guy was to how hard and how great of an effort you were going to get from the Commanders. Brissett got the injury late in the week. He ended up sitting. Howell started. You got a little bit of effort early on in the game. As the game went on, just wasn't anything happening. And so I think that's pretty impactful. This will also, I would say, 95% plus probability be the final game Ron Rivera coaches for the Washington Commanders. I think he's going to be one of the few coaches fired on Monday morning after this game concludes. So is there a bit of an effort shown from the Commanders in that? We talked a lot about how every game we're approaching is in these spots where you have the conflicting incentives on either side. How can you look for the team that is not at the premium to play spoiler? Why I would say Dallas is at a premium is because they closed 13 at home on Thanksgiving against this Washington Commanders team. Dallas home field advantage is significant. We've seen their home road splits. We know what that means to the line. We are now at the same price with the venue flipped in a week where Dallas doesn't necessarily have to win by margin. They just have to get out with the victory. And we're seeing this priced up at the same number. So there's definitely a premium here put on the Cowboys, not as significant as, say, a team like the Steelers or some other teams we're going to talk about. But when I look at this, I don't see a case where I could be comfortable with the Commanders even getting 13 points playing any sort of spoiler. In that first meeting, the Cowboys wide receivers did whatever they wanted against this Commanders secondary. There was nobody in the secondary that could hang with any of these wide receivers. And personally, I thought 45 that the Cowboys hung on the Commanders on Thanksgiving was probably a little bit generous to the Commanders in that game. I mean, Dallas got whatever they wanted on offense all game long. Now with more injuries for the Commanders in the secondary, I don't think that matchup improves at all. And on the other side, you had a Cowboys pass rush that if the Commanders elect to go with Sam Howell, who takes a mountain of sacks, now is dealing with injuries up front, which they were against the San Francisco 49ers. And that was problematic for much of the game too. So I don't like anything at all about the matchup for the Washington Commanders in this game against the Cowboys. I think what they did against them on Thanksgiving repeats. The big question is the urgency to win and cover by margin here for Dallas? And I don't know that you can really be comfortable doing it. So I don't see a case for the Commanders to play spoiler. But on the other side, again, I apologize for waffling, but there's going to be a lot of this. Just not super comfortable laying this big of a number with the Cowboys on the road in a game where there might be some weather impacts, that covering and winning by margin is not top incentive in this. So that gives me a little bit of concern. But to me, the matchup advantage here for Dallas is significant. Next game up, Rams on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. San Francisco, 3.5 minus 0.5 everywhere except for Chris, which is 3.5 flat. I'm lying. I also see Caesars right now, 3.5 flat as well. Total in this game is 42 at Chris, 42.5 at FanDuel. This is a fun one to discuss and talk about. So market ratings, if this game was played last week, would have San Francisco a touchdown favorite. You may even justify that they're going to be bigger than that in that game at home played in San Francisco. So a big premium being put here on the Los Angeles Rams. Why is the premium being put on the Rams? Well, they're in the playoffs. Both of these teams are. San Francisco is locked into the 1 seed. They have the bye. They have home field advantage. The Rams are in as well. There's a back and forth between whether or not the Rams are going to be the 6 seed or the 7 seed. A win in this game would likely get the Rams the 6 seed. And so the question is, why would that matter for the Rams getting the 6 seed versus the 7 seed? It's a road playoff game either way. Well, we just talked about the Cowboys, who, if they win as a 13-point favorite at Washington, would secure the 2 seed. If the Cowboys get the 2 seed with that win, that means that the Lions are going to get the 3 seed. If you think about the Rams, if they're the 6 seed, they end up playing the Lions in the 3 seed. Why would that be significant? Well, Jared Goff, quarterback of the Detroit Lions. Where did Jared Goff grow up, essentially, in the NFL? With the Rams under Sean McVay. So when I look at this, if I'm putting myself in McVay's shoes and I have sort of the choice to pick, I would much prefer to go on the road to play Detroit in the very likely event that the Cowboys win at the Commanders to face Jared Goff, a quarterback that I know and developed, than I would go on the road into Dallas to play a Cowboys team that has just dominated teams all season long at home. That would be my preference of the two. I think that could be a motivating factor for the Rams in how they approach this game. However, there's a conflicting motivation going against the Rams in this spot. When it comes to the decision around resting your playing starters in games like this, preseason games, other opportunities, McVay is the most passive coach that we have currently active in the NFL. It is never a question in the preseason on if he will play his starters. It is always a no. He just does not play guys. He prioritizes resting his players as much as any coach in the NFL. And so based on yesterday with the Rams signing Wynn back to the practice squad, a quarterback, they obviously have Wentz behind Stafford. The fact that transaction hit the wire so early in the week kind of leads me to believe that we might see the Rams approach this with McVay as he typically does in these situations, which would kind of nullify the premium that is being put on the Rams in this game. And it begs to ask the question, should the Niners be a bigger favorite? Now, you can look at this and say, well, the Niners, they're locked into the 1 seed. What are they doing here? Why would they be pushing guys out? We know McCaffrey's not going to play. That's been the rumor that's been kind of pushed out there. He's got the calf strain. Unlikely we see him. However, yesterday on the Kay Adams show, Deebo Samuel was being interviewed and said he expects the 49ers starters to play at least a portion of this game. Is that first quarter? Is that first half? Is that 3 quarters? We don't know. But as you start to kind of look at how this plays out, there's a big premium here put on the Rams that they may not be playing into because of what McVay traditionally does, in which case you're looking at a 3.5 right now on a Wednesday morning for the Niners that is probably short, and you're probably looking at a first half that, if that is the case, and you believe Deebo Samuel and you trust McVay to do what he's done in the past, you're probably looking at a first half price of 3. There's a little bit too short as well because of where these two teams are rated, the talent that's out there, and what this number should have been if this was a week without those incentives dictating what teams are going to be doing. So, interesting look and consideration. Big premium on the Rams. Each one of these games is looking, how do you play against the team with the premium? I think there's a very clear path to how you could justify a bet on the 49ers here on a Wednesday morning. This is a very good point by Nathan, too. Rams' depth is so thin, I think there's no way that they risk their starters. The Rams' depth, first team to second team, is enormous. The same thing can be said for San Francisco, but this is a very good point here for sure. UPF says McVay is known for loving to bench his starters if he somehow can. Absolutely. Certainly stands out in that regard too. So yes, an interesting spot here. If you're looking for a way to play against the Rams with the premium, I think there's a pretty clear case to do that for sure. I'm just pulling up the depth chart because I saw just before we came online, for those of you who are looking at props this week, Jordan Mason is a running back for the 49ers. There was a report about him that if McCaffrey's unable to go, which I believe that he will be unable to go, Jordan Mason is going to be the focal point for the 49ers run game. And I know there's going to be a back and forth between him and Elijah Mitchell, but it sounds like Mason is going to be the guy out of the backfield for San Francisco. So that's something to look at as prop prices begin to populate in the market. Next game up is Bills on the road at the Miami Dolphins. Buffalo, 3 -05 at Chris, 3 -08 at FanDuel, flat 3 everywhere else across the board. Total in this game, either 50 shaded under, around -115 at Chris, seeing that at DK, Pinnacle as well, or 49.5, the largely widely available consensus number at the moment. When it comes to weather in this game, you're looking at 40% rain down in South Florida, 13-mile-per-hour wind in the always swirling wind conditions of Hard Rock Stadium, especially late in the season into December. This game is for the AFC East. The winner will take the title. The Dolphins have the safety net of being in the playoffs. Either way, the Bills do not have that safety net. And believe it or not, if the Bills do lose this game, there is a path that is not incredibly unlikely to which they would miss the playoffs despite their late season run due to their conference record and some of the tiebreakers that would have them on the outside looking in. So from an incentive perspective, even though both teams are playing for the division title, home field advantage, there is a little bit extra, if you will, going in favor of the Buffalo Bills. This is no question kind of peak market pricing for the Buffalo Bills that we could expect in this matchup. And the question that you kind of have to look at in this game is, why are we at this number that we are at? And this is one that we can take away kind of the incentive stuff for this week. You're getting a full effort from both teams. It's silly to kind of think otherwise. So the question you have here with this game is, first of all, how injured, if at all, is Josh Allen? So he has a neck stinger that he suffered last week. And he's also been dealing with some upper body stuff now that he's been running more the last couple of weeks. What's his current status? Because there's no question, accuracy-wise, the last couple of games, there's been some unusual throws that he has made. And so I think it's safe to say at this point, Josh Allen, not 100%. And will this neck stinger that he is dealing with on a team that is so great at downplaying any injuries to Josh Allen, is that going to be an impact in how much he is going to be willing to run in this spot? Josh Allen in high leverage games, his run rate increases significantly. If you take that away from him because of the injury, what is that going to look like for this offense now with Joe Brady, who is allowing him to run more? I'm not sure. There's also the question of what is going on with Stephon Diggs in this offense. Is Diggs potentially dealing with an injury too? The last 2 weeks have been season lows for snap count, not target count, not route run, for snap count. Just is he on or off the field? And he's off the field at rates for Stephon Diggs the last 2 weeks we just haven't seen before. So what's going on with Diggs in this offense? Now, the Bills the last couple of weeks have been dominant, but that's really been driven by their defense. Their offense has stayed relatively stable, if not fell off in a couple of key metrics. Defense has shot back up to where they were earlier on in the season. You ask why that's happening. You have a healthy secondary. You have Daquan Jones back on the defensive line. Lots of guys coming back healthier. This was a Bills defense that was just hammered with injuries in the mid to mid-late portion of the season, kind of in that week 8 to 14 window. Last couple of weeks, a lot healthier. So you now have a Bills team that's really being driven by their defense. And offensively, they've been stable or taking a step back. And so I don't know what you're getting injury-wise, if there's something more behind the scenes here with Diggs and Allen, but there's clearly not something right because we're seeing them perform at uncharacteristic rates as well as being used at uncharacteristic rates. Now, on the other side, when we continue to ask why and what's going on, well, what's the status of Tua in this game? Because against the Ravens, he suffers a shoulder injury. Suffers shoulder. Say that 10 times fast. But he has the shoulder stinger on his left side, his throwing arm, that we don't know the full status of how healthy he is going to be. We also don't know what you're going to get from Raheem Mostert. You take him out of the picture for the Dolphins offense, it's a big impact. We know that Jalen Waddle, very likely to miss this game with the high ankle sprain. And on the other side, what are you getting on the defensive side? Xavier Howard, is he going to be able to play? You lost Bradley Chubb, had him in the game late against Baltimore down 30. That's a massive loss to this defense. And so where I'm kind of conflicted with this game is I want and really could only make the case in this game for betting on Miami at 3. I don't know how you could be comfortable laying the points in this game with the Bills because of their injuries. However, on the other side, in a week where I'm going to waffle on a lot of these games, I'm sorry, guys, lots of injury concerns for Miami too. But this is, to me, very clearly Miami or nothing. Could not lay the points with the Bills, but the injury concerns are probably going to keep me from getting involved with the Dolphins in this spot. So, again, another tricky game in a week full of tricky games. Alex says, just checking, is Stephon Diggs still on the team? If he's not used in the highest leverage game of the season, then there is clearly something going on behind the scenes. So, like, I completely agree with this. And to show you what this has looked like in the last couple of weeks, I'm going to pull up a window, and you can see just how Diggs is being used and the drop-off that he's had to deal with. This might be a little bit difficult to see, but here's Diggs' usage the last number of weeks. And so week 15, 46%, week 16, 60%, week 17, 65%. And again, this is just snap count. Is he on or off the field? You're looking at this stretch between week 5 and week 12 for Diggs. Look at some 87% plus every single week, 99%, 95%, 98%. Coming out of the bye, after Joe Brady takes over, you get the 79% game, and then it's been a significant drop-off. I mean, for a receiver of his caliber, only getting on the field 65, 66% in consecutive weeks with playoffs on the line, to me says something's going on here. Something's not right. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on, but I don't want to be laying 3 points on the road against the Dolphins team where there's been a massive sell-off on them the last couple of weeks. I just don't want to get into that. So I don't know what's going on there, but there's certainly something up with the Bills, especially on offense. James says, have Bills plus 400 to make the playoffs. Feel like I should hedge a little with Miami. Only if you think that Miami's a really good bet in this spot. Otherwise, I wouldn't want to devalue that bet that you're holding at plus 400. I don't want you to take my opinion and let that sway you off from that as well. Rich says, thanks to Adam's insight, I have a Bills to win the Super Bowl ticket at plus 3,500. Nice tip from Adam a few weeks back. Thank you very much. Glad you were able to get that. Hopefully that one gives you a good sweat through the month of January too. Preston says, never good to be outsnapped by Gabe Davis and Khalil Shakir. Yeah, I agree with that too. Does Gabe Davis draw Eli Apple coverage this week, if I'm not mistaken, with some of the injuries? Could be a potential for him to be finding space downfield in his boomer bust nature that he typically plays with. Next one up, Falcons on the road at the New Orleans Saints. Saints are currently a 3 minus 115 favorite across the board. Total in this game is 41.5. This number got out to as high as Saints minus 4.5 at Chris. Then there was immediate buyback on the Falcons. We're now seeing this settle back on the key of 3. Total, again, has been pretty consistent all week, 41.5, 42. So big issue here. We don't know who Atlanta is starting at quarterback. I saw before we came on the live stream, I got an alert from Arthur Smith that said, not from him directly, but from the alert service that said Arthur Smith was still undecided. They're trying to see if Heineke is able to go. I think we know at this point you're getting a better all-around offense from the Falcons with Heineke under center than you are with Desmond Ridder. So that's going to have an impact based on how this number has moved. I think you can say it's partially news-based, but also partially opinion once this was above the 3. I don't have a strong take on this one way or the other. I would say that just from a numbers perspective, we saw these two teams play a couple of weeks ago. I want to say it was late November, and the Falcons won 24-15. That box score was probably the most misleading, if not top 5 most misleading box scores of the entire season for any game. The Saints had several red zone trips that ended up without any points hitting the board. It was comfortably dominating in yards per play. It was outgaining the Falcons. It was just a really kind of quirky first meeting between these two when that game was played in Atlanta. And so that game closed with a number that was less than this one should have been suggested based on how that one closed. But not only do you have the misleading first result, you also have the Saints, who defensively, as I've watched them the last 2 weeks, have been playing visibly harder, even without Lattimore out there, than we have seen them for the last couple of weeks. And Derek Carr, he's not making big explosive plays downfield, but he's not killing them with the back-breaking mistakes, which he had a number of in this stretch of the season where communication was a problem, where he was getting in arguments with offensive linemen. It's looked a lot better the last couple of weeks, the exception kind of being that Rams game on Thursday night that everybody remembers. But if you get a game that's just comfortable from Carr, this Saints offense can kind of match that level of play defensively. I still think the Saints as a team are quite overrated, but it's with this defensive effort they're getting the last couple of weeks, shows and looks a little bit differently. And now if they make the playoffs and get Lattimore back, it becomes a bit of an interesting team to look at. Not necessarily advocating for backing them, but certainly changes the outlook for him for sure. So this is the big thing for me. Who's going to be the QB for Atlanta? I don't know. This game to me is a pass. If you put me on the spot, I would try and make a case for Atlanta, but I don't think that I could get there without the QB news. I don't have much here for opinion of a game either way. Eagles on the road at the New York Giants. Philly, a 5.5-point favorite. Chris still 5 flat. A lot of other places. Total in this game, 42 from left to right across the screen. Speaking of games that I struggle to have much of an opinion on, this is absolutely one of them. Now, let's talk about just the scenario and the number here. So this game at 5.5 is putting a significant premium on the Giants. And whether that's a premium on the Giants or just a big downgrade of the Eagles after their loss to the Arizona Cardinals, take your pick. In no week the last 2 months would you ever get to this number of Eagles 5.5 on the road at the Giants? And so Nathan says, has this come in too far? Eagles were 14-point favorites 2 weeks ago. It really, really has. This is a significant downgrade of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, no indication that the Eagles are resting guys. It's plausible to think that they would, seeing that they could probably use the week off based on how they've been playing, but also the fact that you have guys that are not 100%. You have a game here where you're not going to impact your playoff seeding unless the Dallas Cowboys lose at Washington. You're not going to know the result of that game because you're playing at the same time. And so it's such a big downgrade. And the Giants get some excitement in this spot because Tyrod Taylor is coming back, looked really good against the bad Rams defense, doesn't get much of a better defense here that he's facing in the Philadelphia Eagles. I could never take the Giants at home at 5.5 or 5. I think that that's come too short. But I have no idea what you're getting from the Eagles in this game. But this is and whether you want to call it a downgrade or a premium, however you want to put it, just a crazy drop in price for the Eagles in this. I could see, we talked about Steichen and some of these modern coaches. I could see Sirianni electing to rest guys, perhaps more so than you might get from a traditional coach, which could play into this number, may even push it down a little bit further if you get everybody ruled out for Philly. You can't act on it, but I could never get comfortable backing the Giants in this game at all. Browns on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati out to a 6-point favorite. Total in this game is 38.5. I see a 6.5 at Jazz. I see Heritage 6 slanted towards the 6.5. So a couple small indicators that we might see this tick up a little bit further from 6. Now, Kevin Stefanski before week 17 came out and said if the Browns, before the Sunday games, the Browns played Thursday, but he said before Sunday, if the Browns were locked in, he would elect to not play his starters. I have not seen like the official report hit the screen yet, nor posted anywhere that like everybody's ruled out, like we just got with Mahomes a couple seconds ago. And so I think that that's still going to impact this number a little bit when that officially comes in, but you're obviously seeing the big premium put on the Bengals in this game, despite Cincinnati being eliminated from the playoffs. I mean, this would have been Browns favored if this was played a week ago in Cincinnati. You're now seeing this game, Bengals pushing nearly a touchdown on the point spread. So a massive premium put on the Bengals under the expectation that the Browns are going to sit everybody. I think there's a chance that the Bengals do not play Jake Browning in this spot and potentially go with Jeff Driscoll. I don't think it's a huge chance, but I think that that is a possibility when we're talking about these modern coaches. Zach Taylor certainly fits that bill. He comes from the McVay coaching style, which we know is incredibly passive for games like this with limited importance. I think there's a chance you might see Jamar Chase sit. He's dealing with the shoulder injury, a game that doesn't carry much meaning with it. That's a possibility that we do not see him out there. Nothing confirmed, just kind of speculation from my side. Certainly a big premium put on the Bengals. How could you look at backing the Browns in this spot? Well, I think you have to wait if you're considering it to get that news. Maybe this number pushes up a little bit, but this is a spot we've talked about kind of a couple different situations. I don't love a spot like this where you have a Browns team that's locked in when you're looking at opposing the premium put on the opponent that they are playing. There's been a number of games like this in recent seasons. Eagles, Cowboys, the Chiefs had one. We've seen it quite often where these teams just completely no-show in these spots. And it's such like a conflicting internal situation that players have to deal with within the locker room, knowing that you have the playoff game coming up next week in the wild card round. You're going on the road, but you kind of have this game in between. It's not like a Ravens rest spot. We have the extra week. You're not sure. It's not even quite like the Chiefs rest spot entirely where they get the home playoff game and this Chargers game is stuck in between. I don't love trying to justify a team like the Browns in this spot but certainly just a massive premium put on the Bengals here too. So this one is a stay away, and I don't know how you could ever be comfortable backing the Browns in this game. Bears on the road at the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay is a 3-point favorite across the board with a total in this game of 44. When we're looking at the weather, not a big impact whatsoever for this game, despite some other games you're getting some significant weather impacts. We'll talk about that in a couple of games down the board with Jets-Pats. So not a weather concern game for Green Bay. This is Chicago out of the playoffs. Chicago locked in to their draft position, knowing that they're going to get the number 1 seed. This is Packers win and likely in the playoffs. I think it's a certainty if they win that they're in. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have, again, a differing and conflicting incentives for both sides. Here's what I'll say that's maybe more interesting beyond that. So Chicago has a couple things at play in this game. The first is that Eberflus got the vote of confidence to return next year as head coach. There may be an offensive coordinator shift, but head coaching wise, Eberflus is coming back. And so that's kind of like the mental load off the shoulders of a head coach that allows him to approach this game a little bit differently. I don't want to say that this is Lions Packers Week 18 Sunday Night Football last season-esque, but I think it fits that same category in what kind of effort you might get from the Chicago Bears, because you have the coach who knows he's not going anywhere, so he's comfortable. You have a quarterback in Justin Fields who's playing essentially to justify a potential contract in the offseason, as the Bears now have this number 1 pick that's kind of dangling over him that would most certainly, if used, go to drafting a quarterback. So you have Fields who is being pushed in this spot too. Eberflus was asked this week, are you going to use this as a chance to play spoiler? He came out and said, I'm not going to play that up internally, but I'm also not dismissing it. We know what's at stake. And so that's kind of an interesting comment from a coach that's locked in. So I think there's some interesting kind of extra motivational angles here for the Chicago Bears. There has been pro support from other bettors that I know on Chicago at 3.5, have not seen as much interest at 3. On the other side, it's a Green Bay Packers team that got to take advantage of a Vikings defense and Vikings offense that essentially was in an all-in effort and basically punted after the second quarter in that game. QB switch, a lot of things went the way of the Packers. Green Bay now goes from facing that defense. They got the Bucs with a number of injured starters a few weeks before. There's been some pretty easy defenses for the Packers in recent weeks. Now they're playing a Bears defense that is trending top 3 in the league in almost every key metric the last month and a half. This Chicago defense, and I've had some uncertainty about it in weeks past. I thought maybe the rating was a little bit high. Watched them pretty closely the last couple of weeks. We talked about the Saints playing hard. The Bears defense is playing incredibly hard right now on the field, and there's a lot of get up within that locker room for this game specifically based on how players are talking about it too. And so it's an interesting spot where the Packers are this one team on the whole schedule this week that is playing at home with that incentive added to the game for them. All these other teams are on the road, and you're seeing some pro support in the market for the Bears as this number is coming in a little bit with everything else going on for Chicago. And so it's a very interesting spot for the Chicago Bears in this game specifically, and it's a big step up for the Packers in terms of defensive opponent on the other side that stands out in a big way too. So James Davis says he was able to get the Bears plus 3.5, and also confirmation that Green Bay wins and they are in as the 6th seed. So very, very interesting. UPF says Bears have a chance to kick their rival out of the playoffs while Fields is still playing for his jobs. Got Bears plus 3.5 and love it. Lots going on for the Chicago Bears in this game, to say the least, for sure. Seattle Seahawks on the road at the Arizona Cardinals. So similar spot with the home and road team flipped. Seattle a 2.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 47.5. So Seattle needs the win, and then they need help from Green Bay to find themselves in the playoffs after squandering that opportunity against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Arizona Cardinals come off of a huge road win against the Philadelphia Eagles, a massive upset second half where there was a huge comeback effort, scored on 4 consecutive drives, upset the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm torn on this game. A couple reasons why. The first is that Jonathan Gannon knows his job is secure, which is unique for a team that's been as bad as the Arizona Cardinals. So there's that weight off his shoulders in a similar fashion to Eberflus with the Bears. So you have him essentially playing in this game with nothing to lose. However, that win against Philadelphia was kind of like the statement for him. And I think he's one coach that we can point to this season who's had kind of conflicting incentives all season long. I think to how he handled the Browns game the week before Murray returned. I think about how he handled a lot of the Dobbs stuff and getting him pushed out of Arizona. He's kind of been managing expectations internally almost, where I feel like the Cardinals a lot of times could have looked a lot better than they were, but they never really reached that peak potential. Like the defense early on in the season was playing so hard. They were flying around. And then I know they got a couple injuries, but it was this weird kind of trajectory for the Cardinals all season. And so in this spot, I really don't know what you're getting from Gannon and this Cardinals offense specifically. I think the defense is still going to struggle. I don't know what you're getting from the offense. And this is a number that has come in quite a bit. And even though there should be the premium on Seattle, you're really not seeing it in the market. And that's really the one exception for these teams this week that need this game and need this spot. And I don't know what you're getting from Arizona. This market seems to think that you're going to get a lot from them. I don't know if I fully buy that. On the other side, never an issue for Pete Carroll to get his guys rallying around the game. He's called compete for a reason. And boy, I know you can only look Seattle or nothing, but this market says you should want no part of Seattle, the way that this has been moving and the way that this has been priced too. So, yeah, this is a tough one for sure with Seattle, Arizona. Just had some news come in. We see that Shad says your demand for nailing that Jeff Driscoll call a few minutes ago just got announced. So Driscoll is going to be starting. Joe Flacco is going to be sitting. We're seeing the Bengals now out to a 7-point favorite. And that is something that once comes back on the board, we're seeing places like Pinnacle, Buckeye, Jazz off the board now. Chris just went to 7. So that number has now moved up a little bit. So that's kind of as anticipated. So here's a good example in real time, like we've been talking about. Steelers, Ravens, we're still waiting on that announcement. Even though this Browns Bengals game, that was like very clearly priced in with the premium we were talking about. And we still saw it move once the official news happened. And so even though you're seeing these massive premiums being put on teams and spots, you're still looking at situations where when it's official, it gets pushed out a little bit further. So that's what I'm talking about. If you're waiting to play against news, wait a little bit till it's official because you get that bump if it comes through. So I think we're going to see similar with the Ravens and Steelers at some point as well. Jets, Patriots, a game that we can be pretty quick on here. This is going to be the biggest weather impact game as it stands right now of the entire season. As it looks right now, 70% chance of snow, 30-mile-per-hour wind gusts. If that comes true, we are going to see the shortest total of my lifetime at 30.5 come down a little bit further. I don't know if you could have any expectation that either of these teams in those weather conditions could move the football on one another. You're not going to see any sort of life from either passing game on either side, regardless of which quarterback starts. The Pats said they're going to start Zappe. He's not throwing the football with his arm strength downfield if it's snowing and there's 30-mile-per-hour winds. It's not happening. It doesn't matter who the Jets start either. It's not happening. Both of these teams are going to be running it a ton. They're going to want to get out of this game quickly, and you're going to see just a mess of a game for 4 quarters. And I could never bet under 30 in an NFL game, but it might drop down further if this weather holds as we get closer to kickoff on Sunday. This game means nothing for either side. This could be a Belichick send-off in New England. If you believe the rumors, what might that look like? from a team perspective, I'm not sure. On the Jets side, you're looking at Robert Salah, who got the vote of confidence. In my opinion, he got it much too early. He got it a few weeks ago. And we saw the defense for the Jets against the Browns for the first time really kind of no-show on Thursday Night Football. And now it's extra time off coming into this game, knowing that the season is over, knowing that there's nothing to play for, and now knowing you're going into very bad weather conditions. I don't think you get much of an effort from the Jets at all, but it's not like it's going to be a difficult game plan to contain from the Pats. If that weather condition holds, it's just going to be both teams sitting and stopping the run and a ton of punts going back and forth. Now, if this weather is as bad as it shows, depending on wind direction and what settles on Sunday, you may look at this from an in-play perspective. It's not to the same level that Pats Bills in primetime was a couple years ago, where you were just in-play betting that every single drive because no team could move the football. But it's going to be close. If you're getting 30 miles per hour in snow, no one's moving the football. And so there's going to be in-play opportunities if that weather comes through and you're sitting and watching this one in the early slate on Sunday. Titans hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville, a 5.5-point favorite. Total in this game, 39.5. Titans are nothing in this spot as an opportunity to play spoiler. A very spirited rant from Mike Vrabel yesterday about how he never mails in games, he never rests, he never takes a step back. Now that he's made that public and out there, we know the type of guy he is. You're going to get an effort from the Titans in this spot. There's also the incentive to play spoiler to the Jags and their AFC South hopes as a division rival. I think that factors into it. And the fact is, we're looking at 5.5 now. Can't really bet it at this point because we're waiting for the official Trevor Lawrence news. As we just saw with the Browns-Bengals game, if Trevor Lawrence is ruled in and he's announced as a starter, this number is going to tick up further. The same thing will be said if it happens with Lawrence and Kirk. So there's no hurry to run and bet the Titans in this spot. If those guys are announced in, this number will get to 6 or higher, at which point I think you can look at the Titans as an underdog. For Jacksonville, the problem that I have beyond just the premium being applied to them in this spot, and more so if those guys are able to go, is they're just not a very good football team on offense or defense at this point. They have a ton of injuries on both sides. The defense, which is much healthier than the offense, is downtrending as a bottom 8 defense the last 4 weeks. I don't know why the fall off has been so significant, but they're no longer able to stop the run like they were early season. The secondary is giving up a ton of big plays to opponents, unless it's Bryce Young shocked in the pocket. It's just, it's a team that's going the wrong direction very, very quickly. And offensively, even at the best this season, they've really not had that full 100% full clicking effort, even in this spot where the incentives are so high, with Lawrence coming off injuries, with Kirk coming off injuries, with Zay Jones banged up, with Agnew now out, with ETN in the backfield less than 100%. I don't think you're getting that here either. And so to me, this is a big number for the Jags to be laying to basically any team on a good week. This number is going to get higher if the news comes through for Jacksonville. And I could only look at the Tennessee Titans in this spot for sure. So that is something that I would look at, but one you have to wait on for the news to come through later in the week. Denver Broncos on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Las Vegas, a 2.5-point favorite, total 38. I have nothing to really say here. This number has not moved all week. There's really not a lot that you can look at or take away from this game, I think, that you can use to a wager. The obvious thing that you are going to hear and kind of talk about is both teams eliminated. You have Antonio Pierce in my opinion, his last game as a coach in the NFL and a head coach as the Raiders, because the Harbaugh news that came out a couple of days ago. So there was a time when you could probably look at this in advance last week and say, this might be Antonio Pierce's kind of final rehearsal or display for his case to be head coach of the Raiders next season. However, Now there's Harbaugh with the agent that's tied to the Raiders, and this franchise as a whole kind of commenting that they want to go bigger for a head coach signing. I think that kind of puts an end to it. So you have this interesting incentive angle where we know the guys in the locker room love Antonio Pierce. We just saw them against the Chiefs get up for a massive game where they were kind of sandwiched with that Colts game, which is why we liked Indy so much last week. Now you get it back at home in the final go for Pierce at home against the division rival, led by a head coach, Sean Payton, that's very easy to dislike. I could see a spot here where the Raiders get up and play well for Pierce. There's also a side of this where Aiden O'Connell just struggles for another game. Patrick Surtain can match up with Devontae Adams, and the Raiders have nothing to do on offense, which makes it tough to justify laying 2.5 or 2.5 at home with a team that's dead and out of the playoffs. It could go both ways, but that's kind of how you look at it here. You kind of have to weave between both sides and figure out what you're going to get from that. I don't know the answer to that, so it's going to be another pass for me. So, again, I apologize for all the waffling back and forth, but this is just kind of what Week 18 has led itself to be. But that's really the long and the short of it, of what you're looking at here from the Raiders at this price at home. Garrett asks, can we get a vote of confidence that we will get Playoff Wednesday live streams every single week? I actually am planning to do stuff on game day as well, Saturday and Sunday morning for the weeks too. But yes, there'll be not only will there be one, you might get 2 live streams for that. So yes, that will happen for sure. Garrett, no worries about that one coming up. A good way to ensure that there's more live streams as we pivot into this. Let's get some subscribers into the channel right now. If you have not yet hit the subscribe button, there are 293 of you on the stream right now. I hope all 293 of you are subscribed. If you're not, down below, there's the button. Hit it. Would appreciate if you can subscribe. I botched the graphic as I minimized the window, but would love to have you subscribed to the RAS channel. We'll have more live streams, as I mentioned, next week. And if you're subscribed, you will get notifications for those videos as they go out. Minnesota Vikings on the road at the Detroit Lions. 3 games left to go. The Lions are now a 3-point favorite. Total in this game is 45. This number was lingering around Lions -5. Dan Campbell came out and said that he was planning to play his starters, said that he was full octane, and he was fired up after that loss against the Dallas Cowboys, where we now see that Brad Allen blew the call. That seems to be motivating Dan Campbell a little bit more than he usually needs. Not that he's a guy that needs motivation, but when we think about the Lions, we've seen them every opportunity they get push full out in spots. And so there's no indication at the moment that Campbell is electing to sit his guys. I question whether or not, as we see the game progress into the second half, if guys get a little bit of an early relief, if they end up starting. I don't think that's out of play or out of question. But if you believe Dan Campbell, you're getting a full game effort from the Lions in this spot. For Minnesota, watch that Sunday night game against the Green Bay Packers very intently. I felt like watching how Kevin O'Connell handled the QB situation, some of the plays he was calling on offense, I felt like that was it for the Vikings. I really thought that was kind of the end of their season for them. He went for the desperation switch to Jaren Hall in the first half. Did not work. He pulled back and went with Nick Mullins in the second half. He got into the red zone a couple of times. It just mistakes continued to compound. You can see the frustration. And just every time they cut to him on the sideline in the second half, it just felt like a guy that was completely defeated. There's nothing that the Vikings can do as a spoiler on the road at the Lions. It's a 95% probability, according to some of the playoff machines, that the Lions get the 3 seed and they'll be locked in for the home playoff game. So it's not like the Vikings can play spoiler. I know the Vikings are still technically alive. That's like a sub 4% chance that they're able to make the playoffs. And so I really think that last week was the end for Minnesota. Now, the one thing that is keeping me from considering backing the Lions in this game is if you do get the full effort from Minnesota in this game, and let's say you do get the full effort from the Lions in this game. These two teams played a couple of weeks ago. Minnesota was bet by every pro that I talk with, midweek, late week, game day. I mean, And it was all matchup driven for how the Lions offense matches up with the Vikings defense, right? And it was something that is still going to exist in this game, and those matchup problems are still going to be there. And when you look at the box score, Detroit covered and they won the game. But that, again, we talk about misleading box scores. 4 turnovers for the Vikings in that spot. Minnesota outgained them, put up more than 400 yards, dominated the yards per play. That was a very slanted box score towards Minnesota that ended up being a very misleading result. And now you have that same rematch where incentive for the Lions might be a little bit at question. I fully understand why Minnesota got bet. And even though you kind of want to look at this thinking that it might have been it for Minnesota last week, I could never be comfortable backing the Lions, knowing what the market did, knowing who was involved with the market a couple weeks ago in that move, how it moved, how it finished, how it played out, knowing the matchups are still going to be there on the field this week. And we're at essentially the same price point where the Vikings were getting bet. So to me, that becomes a spot where I have to stay away from the game. But I think that that's a very real thing to consider in a pretty big way. Fact of the matter says, when a coach says we aren't sitting guys, it means they will start. If Detroit is up 14 quick, everybody should sit up or down. They should. I agree with that for sure. And I think that that's a possibility, which when you think about the matchups which are going to be there for Minnesota, if that is something that is existing for the Lions, especially late in the game, even if the score is a little bit less, certainly stands out too. So that's how I look at Vikings Lions. 2 more games to go. Buccaneers on the road at the Carolina Panthers. This was one where there was going to be a little bit of conviction. Unfortunately, we have seen the line move down. Tampa Bay, a 4.5-point favorite on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Total in this game, 37.5. When we started the live stream, the Panthers were 5.5-point underdogs. To me, this was the one spot on the board that you could circle and say, here is the full-out spoiler effort that you can look at from the home underdog. You have Chris Tabor. He's not going to be a head coach next year. This is a nothing to lose, all-out spot where he gets as much as he can out of these guys in his final game as the interim head coach for the Panthers at home. They're hosting the Buccaneers, a division rival with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, who is banged up and less than 100%. There is a clear premium being put on the Buccaneers, who have to have the game to win the NFC South, keep the playoff hopes alive. This was just like the classic Week 18 spot. Everybody's going to love the Buccaneers. You get the interim head coach with the labeled dead team and the Carolina Panthers at home. Everything draft-wise is locked up. And this was just looking like the perfect spoiler spot to back. Now, the money came in on Carolina as we were doing the live stream. The 5.5s got taken out. Any buys to 6 were taken out as well, down to 4.5. We had these two teams play just a couple of weeks ago. It was the Carolina defense that held the Buccaneers offense in check for much of the game, held them to 21 points. It was the Panthers run game that had a lot of success in the middle of the field attacking the Buccaneers defense, that if you think Bryce Young struggles, some of the issues that he has had, the run game is what drove the Panthers to success and cover in that game against the Buccaneers, more than 110 yards on the ground against the Bucs defensive front that typically is very good at defending the run. And so this was a spot where I thought the Panthers could be a great spoiler option. That's been bet in a little bit. Don't love it nearly as much at 4.5 as this has come down since we have started recording. You have to watch the Mayfield injury news and see what the full extent of his issues are going to be. If you have the premium on the Bucs in this spot on the road and you have Mayfield less than 100%, that just makes the premium that more extensive too. So could only look to Carolina in this game. Could not ever be comfortable laying the number with the Bucs, even at 4.5. Last game up on the board, Chiefs on the road at the Los Angeles Chargers. Good opportunity now if you have any questions to wrap up the final 10 minutes here on the live stream about anything, games this week, props, any other questions you have about betting in general, please fire them into the live chat right now. We'll have a couple minutes after here to answer them as well, and I'll catch up with some of the other ones in the chat too. Chiefs on the road at the Chargers, LA a 3.5-point favorite. Total in this game is 35. We got the news as we were on the stream about 10 minutes ago that Blaine Gabbert is going to start. Patrick Mahomes is going to be rested. I would expect you see the same thing to be announced with a number of the Chiefs starters. If it already has, pardon me. I have the alerts on the side, but we know Mahomes is going to miss this game as he's going to be out to rest, and you get the Blaine Gabbert game on the road at the Chargers. Okay, so I actually had some good thoughts on this one because the Mahomes news is not a surprise. We're seeing the Chargers as 3.5-point favorites. You guys know watching, this would obviously never be the number in a regular week. The Bills just closed 13-point favorites at the Chargers. If you have the Chiefs in the same category, you can see just how off this number is. So enormous premium put on the Chargers. And you're looking, okay, how can you back the Chiefs in this spot? And the frustration to me is it's very similar to the Browns at the Bengals, where, like, what are you going to get from Kansas City in this spot? They have the playoff game next week. They've already kind of tipped their hand that there's not much incentive for them at all this week. You're getting Blaine Gabbert starting, who's not leaping Mahomes anytime soon. He's not likely to get anything on other teams either. He's in kind of a comfortable spot. And as much as you would like to look at the Chargers team and say, we know Gift Smith is not going to be a head coach next year, you're looking at the Chargers as a preseason roster at best. You have Easton Stick at quarterback. You have you're very unlikely to have Josh Palmer. You're very unlikely to have Keenan Allen. This is a preseason roster for the Chargers on offense. So it's not only going to be a preseason roster for the Chiefs on offense, it's essentially a preseason roster on the other side for the Chargers. This is a game that when you're watching this on Sunday afternoon, you're going to be thinking to yourself, is it August 15th or is it the first week of January? Because it's going to look and act like a preseason game. And so how can you get to Chargers 3.5? Because even if this was the preseason, this wouldn't have been the number, knowing who's going to be playing for both sides. But it's this spot like the Browns where you could never be comfortable backing the Chiefs, even with this game at 3.5, because of the conflicting incentives you have in this game as a whole. And so you could never back the Chargers, but you just can't be comfortable backing the Chiefs in this game as well. And even on the teaser here, Nat, I think that's uncomfortable too. The Chiefs had a similar situation, although I believe it was they clinched the 1 seed and they sat everybody against the Chargers a couple seasons ago and just got blasted by like 3 or 4 scores. And so I don't know if that's out of the question here. But, I mean, we just saw the Chargers go on the road at the Broncos, who are kind of a dead team in their own right, and fail to move the football. So it's like, how can you trust the Chargers offense with nobody to cover margin, even if it is at home against the Chiefs in a bad spot here? I don't know. Really, really stuck with this game, as I am with a lot of games. This is as indecisive as a live stream as probably you guys have sat through all season long. I'm ready for the playoffs, to put it lightly. This is a tough week to navigate through. A couple spots have been bet, unfortunately. That's really, really tough. So Zach Moss asks, strongest leans as of right now, any totals you were thinking of? I have no thoughts on totals. For leans to sides, waiting on the Ravens news, I would rather wait than bet it now and potentially miss getting a better price after that news is announced. So waiting on Ravens. As I go down the board here, boy, I wish I could put the Cowboys in here, but I can't. So I would say waiting on Ravens. I would say Bears, but not so much at 3. I would say Titans, but waiting to see the Lawrence and Kirk news, potentially getting closer to 7. And I would say Panthers, but lesser so at 4.5. And the last one would be the Dolphins at 3, but I don't love that one either. So waiting on Ravens, waiting on Titans, Panthers on the edge, Bears on the edge, Dolphins on the edge would be the 5 that I list in that. Tony Jones says, what is the website you referenced a while ago that has data on percentage of times defense runs zone versus man? That is SIS. It is a paid subscription, but that is available at Sports Info Solutions is the website that I use for that. Couple more before I get to your question there, Devin. Rich asks, in your opinion, what is better value? Team A at +2.5 at even money, or if another app has Team A at +3 at -120? I guess my question is, what is a half point worth? Big factor into this would be the total. In general, you're looking at that, as you gave it in that example, as being equivalent prices. If the total is higher, the half point is worth less. If the total is shorter, the half point is worth more. For very specifics between the apps, you could use a half point calculator. There's a number of those available that you can search, and that would give you the exact answer. I couldn't give you an exact answer for every single time that occurs, because the total is going to impact the exact value of that half point. What I will say in general is, if you are looking between the two apps, in the NFL specifically, on the main number. So if, for example, let's look at a game like the Broncos Raiders, which is right on 2.5 or 3. In general, and I'm generalizing, as a rule of thumb in the NFL, if the main point spread is on the 2.5 or 3 in the NFL, that's what you're seeing as the main point spread everywhere in the market. Very rarely are you going to see books misprice that to a point where you have a lot of value playing at one or the other. Where you tend to find the differences that make one bet more valuable than the other is when you're looking at the alternate spread options that are listed from sportsbook to sportsbook. It's not difficult for sportsbooks now to price this right on the main numbers that they're posting on the board. And so unless you're acting very, very quickly on a move, you're probably not going to see a big advantage in the bets you're making one app to the other through line inefficiencies that are just priced wrong on the main number. Now, I'm not discrediting the value of line shopping. If you have the option to bet a game and you can find three minus 120 and it's equal to the equivalent price of 2.5, and you're looking between two apps, it's an easy decision on which app you should make that bet at. But in terms of sportsbooks making mistake on the main widely available number, it just doesn't happen very often on that main number as it does with alts. But that's a long-winded answer, Rich, to say the total is what's going to dictate largely how much that half point is worth. And I would just search for a half point calculator online, and that'll let you do the comparison, whether you choose to subscribe to a half point calculator or not. There's some good free ones and some good paid ones too that are out there as well. Jason says, thought you liked San Francisco first half, FH, not 1H. Yes, you can put that out there too if you want to play the news. Good thought on that one. Chris says, any thoughts to the Titans going for last hurrah with Vrabel game as head coach, or potentially vets leaving Henry or Tannehill? If I didn't mention that, yes, it is very likely the last go around for Derrick Henry, which could factor in. But I would say, Chris, that kind of ties into my sentiment for liking the Titans too. A couple other ones that I want to put in there. Merritt says, I showed up late to the party. You're excused. Were there any thoughts on Indy Houston over 47.5? Seems like a fair number. That was my sentiment on that being a fair number as well. Didn't have many thoughts there, but if you want to go back and watch that, it was probably around like the 13 or 14 minute mark. Had a lot of thoughts on how to approach that game in play. Last one I want to bring up. This will be a good one. Devin Barth says, what are your thoughts on playing props based on incentives? This is a great topic this week. For example, DeAndre Hopkins needs 49 yards for $1 million. People much wiser than I thought that the Hopkins stuff was legitimate. That's what I'd say on that one. In general, and I wish I could do a podcast with Pizzola on this one at some point, because we had a really good conversation with it yesterday. I actually had a good conversation with Hitman about it too, in relation to Sal's thread that was posted with the incentives and how that was being discussed and how that was being talked about. And so I have a lot of thoughts here. And so, Devin, if you want something specific with this topic or anything, please let me know in the chat. What I'll say in general, as sort of just a kind of overarching betting rule of thumb for these incentives, is that if they matter and if they're important enough, they're going to either be priced into the prop market immediately or they're going to be bet into place within minutes. And the reason I say that is, as someone who's been kind of on the fringes of the prop market, the competitive nature within props, especially this year, as you are seeing a number of very popular prop services that have been profitable annually for seasons past. This year, almost across the board, every single prop service has struggled. And I think it really reflects in the NFL specifically how much more competitive the prop market has become with such an influx of new bettors, but also just really smart bettors coming into the market too. And the other factor contributing to this is, if I go back 10 years ago to when young Adam was just kind of getting into the betting space, when you think about the prop offerings that were out there, it was maybe a handful per game every single week, right? And that's what books had, and players bet into it. And you were kind of seeing numbers follow the same trajectory week after week because there just wasn't a lot of prop betting going on. The big problem now is that props are quickly starting to overtake straight wagers on sides and totals made pregame. And so not only are there a lot more smarter bettors entering the prop market and utilizing information that they have or competing with others for the same information, but you now have sports books who have so much volume in props coming in on a daily and weekly basis that they're just becoming much better at setting opening prices. And where this is becoming even more difficult is a lot of sports books are outsourcing prop numbers to modeling services and data firms, which are giving them better openers to begin with as well. And so when it comes to something that's incredibly popular, widely discussed, and widely talked about, like incentives, not only are those sports books well aware that the incentive week is a big thing in week 17 or 18, depending which year you want to reference, they now have the data from past years and recent years to be more aware of it. But you also have way more people competing to play those incentives as well, which makes it really, really difficult. And the same thing can be said for almost any type of prop wagering that goes on now. I think the big difference between sides and totals in the NFL and props in the NFL at the moment is, with sides and totals, everybody is working from essentially the same pieces of information. And it's really a way of how do you put those pieces of information together in a way that's unique to find an edge within the betting market. With props, it's largely just really good projections that are widely available. How can you action it? And how can you get down first before these other people are able to get to? Because it's so info-driven and so info-based that it's becoming really, really difficult. So again, another long-winded answer to say, if you're seeing an incentive posted online and you're saying, I'm going to take that and I'm going to bet on a prop because of it, you're probably making a very bad bet. And a good way to tell if you're making a bad bet on that, take the player's name that you were searching. So for instance, Devin, you came back and says, Schultz, 4 catches on Saturday for 250,000. I don't know if it's up yet, but here's a good way to tell if this is going to be a good or a bad bet. So if you search Dalton Schultz covers props and you pull up this page, let's see if anything's available. So he does have a couple markets available. He does not have his receptions available yet. He does have his receiving yards numbers, which are available. You can see all the past closing lines in this for the last 10 games. And as you can see, he had a couple games. Cincinnati, one of the worst tight end defending teams in the league. Same thing with Arizona. This was a stretch of time where Houston with Stroud were extremely aggressive passing, and 2 just really great matchups for Schultz in this game. Those numbers were closing 50.5. The early openers we're seeing are 42.5, which is higher than last week, higher than the game against Cleveland, higher than Tennessee, higher than Jacksonville. These numbers are all shaded higher than what they've been in recent weeks. Houston, I can't remember off the top of my head how the Colts specifically defend tight ends, but it's not nearly as friendly of a matchup as it was against those teams when Schultz was at 50.5. And you're getting a Colts team that is much weaker at defending passes outside to wideouts than they are against tight ends. And so not only is this number for Schultz largely because of that incentive, as well as the higher total, as well as the matchup priced a little bit higher, but it's already known in the opener. That's a very early price. It's a price that's going to get bet up. And so you're probably going to see Schultz from a yards perspective be in the high 40s by the time the market's widely available late on Thursday. And so now you're going to have a wave of people who see this incentive stuff and say, well, I really want to bet on Dalton Schultz. The problem is you're betting into a number on Schultz that is reflecting probably a price point that is at the most favorable matchup that he has had all season. It's already priced in. And that becomes this part of the problem with a lot of this incentive stuff that is being pushed out there. And so it becomes really hard to action that in the space right now. And there's I think a really interesting conversation about how it's handled from a content creation standpoint and what people want to see and what is valuable or not versus others. And so that's kind of a long-winded answer for the prop incentive stuff. It's going to be priced in. You're very likely making a bad bet, and that makes it very difficult to find much value using something like that. Last one to wrap up. Nathan says, do the books have lines set to predict players getting benched, which would favor unders? There's a book right here, which is written by Ed Miller and Matthew Davidow called Interception, which I think illustrates something like this very well. Two of the smartest guys in the industry when it comes to setting prop prices, in-play prop prices, same-game parlay prices, some really insightful thoughts about what goes into creating those models at sportsbooks and just how big of a challenge it is for these sportsbooks to get right. And that's a good example of something that is what's kind of labeled as an edge case within these models, to where you can set something for a regular circumstance very well. You can put manual adjustments for certain situations in games, but it's very difficult with these edge cases to get the numbers right, which is why availability for props and mini games this week is going to be very scarce in those games where the benching aspect is possible. And there was a good NBA example a couple of days ago. It's really, really difficult to account for things like that. And there's going to be a reluctance to post. And I think it's going to be especially true this season more than any other in play, where there's opportunities like that with in-play props to have those benching spots or unique coaching standpoints that stand out in a big way too. And so I would highly recommend, if you want like real specifics about that and how it looks, let Matt explain that to you in that book. I think it would be pretty eye-opening to stand out. I would highly recommend doing that if you're looking at that in this week, as well as into the playoffs that stand out too. Fact of the matter says this is an excellent program. Adam is so down to earth, but also sharp as hell. Really appreciate this. I appreciate the comments very much. I just want to say thank you to everybody who has joined all 18 weeks of the regular season on Wednesdays or the occasional Thursday for this live stream. It's been great to be able to do these this season. It was great to be also seeing the numbers continue to grow. A lot of chat, and I hopefully have been able to help everybody throughout the course of the season. As we go through the playoffs, we'll do it every single morning on Wednesday. Games will be a lot better to talk about in general, with some more conviction, I think, as we go down the stretch. They'll also be a lot shorter than an hour and a half going forward as well. But this will continue every Wednesday. The daily podcast wraps up on Friday. I will have my initial thoughts on the podcast feed every single Sunday, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with off-season content in the next couple of weeks and have updates for everyone as well. But thank you to everybody who stopped by and joined the show. If you have any more questions because you're watching after, leave them down in the comments. Give me a thumbs up or a subscribe before you head out, and we'll see each and every one of you back here next Wednesday for the Wild Card Week playoff stream.